Hi guys, welcome back to Masculine Mastery, the show where we talk about things that matter to men. Our second international episode, and we're in Turkey with none other than Daniel Haqiqatjou, founder of Al-Asna Institute and the Muslim Skeptic across social media. Daniel, assalamu alaikum and marhaban.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
How are you?
Great.
Good.
Good to be here, Dr. Asif.
It's a pleasure to have you. We met in October at the Muslim Father Support Forum conference. Didn't get a chance to speak much. But then we spoke about the dangers of feminism when it comes to civil court marriages and the modernist agenda, secular liberalism, the whole left-wing policies and kind of pernicious attempts to undermine Islam. Because realistically, they don't see Hinduism as a threat. They don't see Judaism as a threat. They don't see Christianity as a threat. These are spineless, toothless when it comes to a worldview. They're just religions, right? Islam is a nizam. It's a comprehensive system. Economic, as you mentioned, family, economy, society, it's a full system. So they have to somehow find a way to attack Islam. You come at it from, you see the bigger picture. I concentrate on masculinity. And from your point of view, Daniel, masculinity has been attacked, and you talk about this in previous lectures. But just to summarize, why has there been a concerted attack on the rujula? Not just for Muslims, although we have fallen prey to that. Why has there been a concerted attack on patriarchy, let's say, which again aligns with rujula from the Islamic paradigm?
Well, the simple answer is that patriarchy and male rujula, as you're saying it, this poses a threat to dominant systems of power that are meant to control society according to the interests of the dominant power. So if you have men that are going to stand up and say, no, this is unjust. What is happening, for example, to Palestinians is unjust. What is happening to the Uyghurs is unjust. What is happening to the Rohingya is unjust. What is happening to the Indian Muslims in Kashmir is unjust. And even within certain countries in the West and throughout the world, these are injustices. We have to change the situation. This becomes a threat to those who are in power, who are dhalim, they're oppressors. So the best way, or one of the most effective ways to neutralize that threat is to destroy the men. The strong men are the top priority. We have to cut them down. We have to weaken them. In the past, the way that you would do that is through assassination, for example. You could either assassinate or you could try to bribe them. Yes. You could trap them. You could exile them. Those types of, you could detain them, put them in prison. And we see this with our ulama. Yes. The scholarly tradition. Yes. All of the major ulama of our history, like Imam Ahmad, for example, Imam Malik, Imam Abu Hanifa, for example, even, they were imprisoned.
Ibn Taymiyyah,
rahimahullah, they were imprisoned, right? Because they were men, they were rajul, they had that rujula, and this was a threat. Because they were going to stand for the truth, they were imprisoned. So this is a common pattern within history. Now the technology exists, and there's more of this kind of scientific basis for how can we manipulate physiology. How can we manipulate psychologically, mentally, to turn what are men into these docile males. Not men, males, right? So this is something that has reached such a crazy extent that even, I'm sure you're aware, the American Psychological Association, the APA, has said that being a stoic, strong man is actually toxic. This is actually...
It's pathological.
Pathological, exactly. So even being a man is now a disease according to the experts, the scientific community. So this is definitely a concerted effort, and it's very shocking.
Yes, so you mentioned the word neutralize, and this is actually, a medical word, neutered. What does neutered mean? You're castrated, and now castration is not what they did to the African slaves across the transatlantic slave trade from West Africa, Gambia, Benin to Cuba and to Brazil and to the Caribbean islands. That was a castration, right? Gone. These are now docile workers who wouldn't have any sexual urges. Now it's chemical. What we drink, what we eat, what we wear. We spoke about it this morning as well. It's a very slow and deliberate attempt to pacify. And Islam is not a religion of pacifism. And you mentioned there Rajul. Surah Yasin, chapter 36 of the Quran. Allah tells the story, a man came from the furthest part We had 3 messengers, 2 initially, then a third one, and the man came from the furthest part, Rajal. In the story of Musa alayhi salam, there was a secret believer, Rajal. They described as Rajal. It's always the Rajal who stands up to authority, who's not scared of death. And he mentioned Ibn Taymiyyah there, rahimahullah. He said, what can my enemies do to me? If they imprison me, I've got more time to research,
read.
And if I die, I'm a shaheed, etc. So we have to have this mentality where we're willing to give our lives for the deen. And we mentioned yesterday one of the biggest pandemics in the ummah, because we're big in number. There's about 2 billion Muslims in the world currently. Is wahan, predicted by the Prophet ﷺ. Wahan, love of dunya, hubb of dunya, hatred of death. Khawf, hatred of death. And we're seeing this now with what happened in Rafah last night. I'm 75 years, but what happened in Rafah last night, subhanallah, I've seen everything as a doctor. Just the images yesterday, they do shock and disturb. We're seeing a zulm, pharaonic level zulm. Because what did the Pharaoh do? Kill the babies.
Yeah.
Because the men would become what? Rajal.
Yeah.
And they had Musa alayhi salam. Musa alayhi salam, this podcast is about masculinity, and the most mentioned prophet in the Quran is who? Musa alayhi salam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes him as qawi on ameen. He was not afraid to stand up to authority. He was truthful. And it goes back to lack of integrity. So I think all this goes very, very, very well in terms of the end of times. Dajjal, deception. Deception is from Dajjal. He's the great deceiver. So chemical castration, Daniel, okay? What are the symptoms of it? Obviously, you talk about feminism, modern, liberal secularism, the progressivism, which are all kind of modernist paradigms, 1750s, Enlightenment, all that kind of stuff, and Foucault and all these kind of philosophers. What are the symptoms then? Because I can speak medically, but what are the, let's say, adab and akhlaq? What is the adab and akhlaq of a simp?
Of a simp. Yeah, so this is an important term. A simp is someone who is going to violate principle, violate justice for the sake of kindness, right? And kindness and compassion, these are important values. Everyone should be kind and compassionate, and no one expresses this or exemplifies this better than the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And all the Anbiya, kindness, compassion, and many hadith speak to this as well. But kindness and compassion can be taken too far, where the standards of justice are obliterated or even neutered or neutralized because you have this overemphasis on kindness and compassion. So a simp is someone who thinks he is doing something good by being overly compassionate, for example, by saying that, well, I'm a father or I'm a husband, but my wife, she wants to leave the house without hijab, and she wants to go and mix with men, and she wants to go maybe even to a club or drink alcohol, but that's her choice. I only want to empower her because I love her and I'm kind. And only an insecure man who is, a brute would try to control his wife and tell her what she should wear or what she should not wear, who she should meet and who she should not meet. This is the epitome of a simp. Because Islam says, no, you are responsible as the man to guide your family and protect them from the hellfire.
Of course.
And Allah says this in the Qur'an, for example. So this is something that if you are violating your responsibility as a man because of your false sense or your misplaced sense of kindness and compassion and sympathy and empathy, then this is simphood, and it leads to the destruction of the marriage, destruction of the family, destruction of society.
Yes, it inverts the normative familial hierarchy, which is a rajul al-qawwamuna ala nisa. He was a rajul. Allah is giving him more daraja above the woman. Simp is a pretty recent term, right? We didn't grow up hearing it, but we grew up with a word called the youth.
Yeah,
is that the same thing?
Yes, exactly. That's the same thing. The youth, as mentioned by the Prophet ﷺ, this is someone who's also condemned by the Prophet. And why is that? Because he has no sense of ghira or protective jealousy. He doesn't have a problem with his wife just mixing with other men in an inappropriate way, or his daughter being seen by other men and enjoyed by other men. He has no sense of responsibility to protect her from these kinds of problems. And the thing is that the feminist narrative, this feminist cancer, is telling women that, yeah, you have to be empowered, sexually empowered, you have to dress, in an appealing, attractive way so that you own your sexuality. Your sexuality is yours. I don't understand how that makes sense. Like, you're dressed sexually, how does that empower you? That empowers men who are enjoying looking at you.
It cheapens you.
It cheapens you. Yeah. So again, this inversion that you're referring to, this Dajjal, because Dajjal is inversion, deception and inversion, as you mentioned. So the youth is someone who doesn't stand up for the haqq and the justice and say that, no, this is inappropriate, this is violating the standards of Allah. This is not acceptable. The confident man, the true protector of women, should say that, no, this is not appropriate. And he encourages his wife and his daughter and gets them to act in the correct way.
Drinking tea, bismillah. So the youth is one pandemic. The other pandemic we're seeing is of tabarruj. And it existed at the time of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. We know this. They used to uncover the chest and bring the hair to cover the breasts, and very, very immodest and degenerate. But now, I suppose it's got to a level now where even day-to-day interactions are full of makeup. In a workplace, 60% of university students, undergraduates, are women. It's almost seen as nonsensical to not go to university. Even if the degree is meaningless, you have to go to university. So you have to get married after the university, and like you said earlier today, there has to be some ROI, return on investment. You spend 3-4 years at university, accumulating thousands of pounds worth of riba interest, riba loans and all these things. You have to make that back. So you get to 25, 26, okay? You've spent 3 or 4 years in the workplace. The tabarruj is on the rise, because in this workplace, to get promotions, you have to look well kept, well dressed. At the same time, you're rubbing shoulders, and we know what this does with estrogen in women. Makes them more masculine. It decreases their estrogen levels because they have to be competitive. Hence the deep voices, the more masculine kind of frames as well we're getting. So is the tabarruj linked to the youth, or which one comes first? Is it chicken and egg, or are they interdependent?
I think that the responsibility falls on men ultimately, because Allah has given us the authority. And when Allah says in the Qur'an, as you cited, الرِّجَالُ قَوَّامُونَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ in Surah An-Nisa, verse 34, that men are authorities over women. Men have to be leaders. Like that's one of the defining characteristics of being a man. But if you're a leader, then you also have more responsibility. You have more accountability and more liability. So if it starts with men, once men start lowering their standards, then women will follow. And they will feel like, okay, then it's fine for me to display my beauty, put on makeup, go and mix with other men, take selfies, post on Instagram. Now, unfortunately, it's shocking, but what we couldn't have conceived of 10 years ago. I'm sure this is not a problem with the Pashtun, mashallah, but with other groups, ethnicities in the Muslim community, you'll have imams who will post pictures of their wives. And subhanAllah, you're a 60-year-old man, and you're posting pictures not only of your wife, of your daughter, oh, it's Eid, and you went for Eid Salah, and you're all dressed up and looking nice. You've taken a picture, and you're posting that for other men to look at your wife and daughter. Like, this is not the right thing, brother. So this is, inshallah, we try to be nice and remind everyone about these kinds of practices, that this is not appropriate. But the women follow the lead of the men. So I put the primary responsibility on Muslim men to set the standard. Yeah. So the follow-up question to that is, how does one navigate in the West? So a lot of brothers phone me for coaching, or they message me privately as well. How does a Muslim man who's firmly grounded in the tenets of Deen be assertive, be diplomatic? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says use hikmah in discourse. How does a Muslim man discharge wisdom, hikmah, hilm in these matters of mutabarraja?
tabarruj, and his daughters perhaps, they've seen their friend wear makeup, their mother wears makeup, or the mother's friend, they go for coffee mornings, the ukhs and bints go for coffee. It's very common in the UK. There's like hijabi coffee morning on every Tuesday morning.
Yeah.
How does a man not enforce but kind of guide, like a shepherd? We are the shepherd ultimately, and all the Anbiya were shepherds. It's a kind of training to be a prophet. You're guiding a flock towards one particular course. It's all training, and I think there's a hadith that all the prophets were shepherds initially.
Right.
How does a shepherd, the rajul, guide the misguided, whether that's his daughter, his mother, his sister, or his wife? How do they guide diplomatically? What are the strategies you suggest to some of the brothers who don't want to come across as, I've been accused of being Taliban, Pashtun, etc. How do you navigate that?
So when it comes to Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar, enjoining the good and forbidding the evil, there are principles involved, right? So there are different approaches to take. And these approaches are mentioned by the ulama, and there's a lot of good advice that you get from imams like Imam al-Ghazali, for example, in Ihya Ulumuddin. His magnum opus, basically, where he discusses that you have to have a degree of tadarruj or tadrij, like gradualism.
Right.
So, as an example, like you don't necessarily have to go full blast against someone. It doesn't matter if it's a daughter, son, wife, husband, whatever. Anyone that you want to advise, you have to recognize what is their position, what is your position compared to them, relative to them. Because what the kind of guidance or advice that you give to your mother is not the same as what you give to your daughter or to your wife. That's a part of hikmah, is understanding who you're talking to and what is your relation compared to their position. So that's step number one, but there's also a kind of gradualism. You give them the advice, you remind them, you give them the reminder in a gentle way, and hopefully that is enough for many people. But if that is not enough, and you have the authority, for example, a child, then you take it to one other step. You say that, well, this is not acceptable. You get a little bit harsher, and you lay down the law, you lay down the rule, basically, that this is actually not acceptable. Maybe then they still don't listen. Then you go to step 3, say, okay, well, there's no more fun, basically. Your phone, forget your phone. This kind of extra time that you have after school to go with friends, forget that. This allowance money that you have to spend on things that you enjoy, forget that. This is called discipline. This is called consequences.
Kind of graduated process. So how far does that go then? What's the last step, let's say?
So the last step, the thing is that the legal systems in the West will limit the authority of a husband or a father, actually, to discipline his children. Islamically, there is this kind of authority that the father has, that he can just say that, well, this is unacceptable. If you don't listen to what I'm saying, then you can't leave the house, for example, until you are dressed appropriately. Unfortunately, that factor doesn't exist, because you can be charged with actual legal consequences. And they've deliberately made these kinds of laws to destroy the family by destroying the authority of the father. But in other means is like shaming. This is important. Shame culture. That and many human beings naturally respond to being shamed.
It's the strongest emotion.
It's a very strong emotion, and that's something that can happen at a communal level. So when we make it unacceptable for displaying yourself, especially if you are part of a good family, like why are you shaming your family by dressing like this, going outside like this? They've tried to neutralize even this by calling it being judgmental. Don't be judgmental. Don't judge others. You don't know what's in their heart. Which is true, and no one should judge what is in someone else's heart. But you can judge what's apparent. You can judge the outward appearance and the outward practice. And that's the only thing that you're shaming, is what they are putting on display for the world to see. But what is in their heart, of course. The person who is acting like this might be far greater than I am in terms of his position with Allah, in terms of what is in his heart. But that still doesn't nullify my right and my duty to do Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar, to enjoin good and forbid evil publicly and call that person out. That judgment is part and parcel of Islam. You have to have that in order to preserve the decency and the values of the community. And again, men, the rijal, as you're mentioning, they're the pillars of the community because they do that. And this is why we're the best community that's been brought forth for mankind, as Allah says in the Qur'an. Because we forbid evil, we enjoin good, and we believe in Allah.
So we are kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat lin-nas. We are the best nation brought forward for mankind. But now we're seeing a complete annihilation of the delineation between Muslims and non-Muslims. And Rasul ﷺ told us there'll be a time where holding on to the Kitab of Allah, the Sunnah of Rasul ﷺ will be like holding on to hot iron coals, I believe. And then going on to that, another hadith where you will be strange, like the strangers. It started off in the Ghuraba, something strange, because the Quraysh were burying their daughters and doing all, worshipping random dates and all these things, and absolutely nonsense. And now we've gone past that stage where they're worshipping their desires, they're worshipping their gender, they're worshipping, and even job worship, right? Careerism. It's a form of shirk, right? Literally, you're just chasing careers and titles. That's your ilah. This is your form of worship. You have nothing else going for you. This is literally all you have. So now the demarcation, let's say, between Muslim and non-Muslim is getting increasingly blurred. We're getting liberal Islam, and you coined the term, I believe, last year, and it struck a chord. Compassionate imams. I think you should patent that word, by the way. You should copyright it or something. IP, you talk about IP. Right. This is intellectual property. What do you mean by compassionate imams? Without naming any names, what's your overarching definition of this?
So the term compassionate imam, it's ironic, because compassion is something that's good. It's encouraged to be compassionate. But you have these figures, these imams or du'at, speakers, preachers, that they take compassion to the extreme where it's actually violating principles of Islam. Exactly like you were saying, dayuth, being a simp imam. So to use this kind of term compassion ironically, and that makes it a little bit more memorable. And I don't know about I'm sure you talk about branding and this kind of. So sometimes with branding, it's good to have something memorable, and there's different ways to make something memorable. One is irony. So they're compassionate, but we're meaning it in an ironic way. And yes, some people get confused. They say, well, why compassion is a good thing? So why do you think compassion is bad? The fact that they have that conversation or that question makes it more memorable for them, so that when you finally define it, the term will stick with them. So these really they're deviants basically, because they're distorting the deen, and they think that they can be more compassionate than Allah, that they can be more compassionate than the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because they are giving rules and they're nullifying other rules and they're nullifying other principles of deen. They're saying that women can go and mix, women can do this tabarruj, they can dress up, and no one should judge them, and mind your own business, and they can, a wife is the boss and she can boss her husband around, and she can divorce him because he doesn't treat her exactly as the queen that she is. All of this nonsense that is preached is very damaging. It's extremely damaging to marriages. And I have many brothers who will come to me and over the years, and they've said, Daniel, I thought you were extreme. I didn't agree with your criticism of this compassionate imam, but now, guess what? My wife was listening to that imam, and now we're divorced.
Cause of divorce, yes.
And so, she divorced me, she took half of my wealth, she took my children, and I owe you an apology. This has happened many times over the years, because unfortunately, when you're a simp, you don't realize that you're a simp until it's too late. You have to be aware of these realities, and what compassionate imams are pushing is simphood. Is being a dayuth. That's the ideal that they are promoting within the community. They're empowering women to this position of becoming monsters and decreasing the authority and the power and the ability to be pillars of justice for the men. So this is a complete inversion of the way that Allah has intended for any community to be, and any family. And we know the very famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he says, "Kullukum ra'in." every one of you is a shepherd, as you mentioned, and every shepherd is responsible for his flock. And in this hadith, there's a clear hierarchy.
Yes.
The husband or the father is mentioned first, that he is the shepherd of his family. And only then is the mother or the wife mentioned.
Yes.
The Prophet ﷺ didn't mention, the mother and the father equally are the shepherds of their family. There was no equality in this hadith. It's first the father, and then the mother, and then the imam is also mentioned.
Yes.
So this is a hierarchy that is set up by the hadith. This is the way that Allah has intended it. The compassionate imam, in an effort to be very kind and generous of spirit towards the sister, says that no. Men and women are equal, and you can do everything that he can do. You should have every power that he has in a marriage or whatever. This is, and in the community, actually, this is an inversion. This is contrary to what Allah has intended.
Yes, exactly. It's an inversion. It is pimping out the deen, scholars for dollars. It is playing to the gallery, because majority of the audience who pay for the courses, these 3-day seminars and retreats and books, all sisters, right?
Exactly.
70% of household income and spending is females, is done by the females. And you mentioned compassion. Compassion is rahm, right? We've got compassion, it's part of the deen. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allah is more compassionate 70-fold than our mother. But the compassion that these imams have is one-sided. It's literally compassion only for the sisters. Playing to the gallery massively. So how do we, you're on a one-man mission, it seems, to call out these imams, speak about them, because essentially they're monetizing their audience and pandering to this narrative, sells the books, sells the courses, gives them first-class flights to Malaysia and all these countries. It pays for their lifestyle. So how do we, as an ummah, wake up to this, let's say, insidious, pernicious cancer? Because it's not overt cancer like Zionism. This is a more pernicious, in the background, like radiation. Like Chernobyl, it killed you in 30 years. It's not a direct nuclear blast, but it's a slow thing. How do we wake up to this?
I'm pretty hopeful. I think that people are waking up. 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, when I was talking about this subject, I would mention concepts like hypergamy. People weren't aware. The Muslim community wasn't aware. Now you have this red pill movement, which is not fully Islamic in some of its recommendations. Some of its recommendations are contrary to Islam. But in general, they have a correct idea that there has been this attack on masculinity, on being a male, and there is this illegitimate empowering of women to such a degree that they have become monsters. So the red pill movement, even though we don't fully agree with it, that has popularized a lot of these critiques against feminism, and that's a good thing. I see the next generation as actually being more well-placed to combat some of this cancer that you're talking about. So I'm actually pretty hopeful. The only question, however, is a demographic issue. Because when it comes to the size of families, if families remain small, and women continue to delay their marriage because they're pursuing career or they're pursuing education, they delay their careers, they continue to feel empowered in the sense where they don't want to be homemakers, they don't want to be mothers even, or if they want to be a mother maybe to one child and they don't even want to take care of that child, they just ship them off to daycare. If that continues to be the practice, then there's a structural problem in the community that just pure teaching or da'wah is not going to solve. There needs to be other kinds of bigger solutions coming from at the governmental level, for example, or the communal level that addresses this kind of demographic challenge. In some countries, the demographic challenge is so bad that they're literally going extinct. Like the birth rate is so low.
Japan, some countries like that, yeah.
Japan, South Korea, basically all the European countries, America. The only way that they can address this is through immigrations. Basically take people away and human capital away from countries that do have a high birth rate, that don't have feminism, that don't have this kind of empowerment problem. But if this kind of feminism spreads to the entire world, it literally means the extinction of human beings. So this is the bigger problem. I'm hopeful that people are going to wake up and they're going to realize that, look, not everything is about kindness.
Yeah, of course.
If it's a choice between being kind and compassionate and giving women everything that they want, what they think that they need and what they think that they want, as opposed to the persistence of the human race, we ultimately have to go with the persistence of the human race.
Exactly, and that's in our DNA. Even the atheists like Richard Dawkins talk about the propagation of the gene. As the Selfish Gene, the book that he wrote, it's essentially self-propagation is one of, even Sheikh Taqiyuddin Nabhani talks about it in Nizam al-Islam. The three things. Propagation is one of survival, procreation. It's one of our basic survival needs. Feminism, even the whole homosexuality. If this took hold, the population will dwindle, literally, because there's no way to procreate.
Right.
So, mentioned in Japan, there's a phrase in Japanese, not Japanese, in Cantonese, southern part of China, where a woman, if she's over 25 and not married, do you know what she's called?
Leftovers?
Yeah, leftovers, but it's a more kind of funny name.
Oh, okay.
Christmas cake.
Oh.
after 25th, she's expired.
Oh,
so they call it Christmas cake. Yeah. But that's the, and even in, Pakistan, in Iran perhaps, this was 30 years ago, women would get married as teenagers, 18, medically speaking, by the way, on the record, the best time for a woman to have children when her pubic symphysis, i.e. pubic bones, the middle part of the pubic bone, is more lax, like a child's skull, it can be malleable, is 18 to 22. That's when it's more lax. That's where you have the easiest birth canal, because it's wider. The older she gets, particularly in her 20s, 30s, and at 35, you reach high risk pregnancy, chance of preeclampsia, gestational diabetes. But now sisters are having their first child at 37, 35. And when you approach your sister for marriage, and I know lots of brothers have, she's 22, 24. She still thinks she's got time. Big misconception, and I blame the parents, by the way. You mentioned it earlier as well. If you had a daughter, like you, I've only got sons as well. If I had a daughter, I would encourage her. You can have studies, but marriage comes first. First things first, and marriage and studies should not be mutually exclusive. Studies can wait for marriage, but marriage can't wait for studies. And we've got this inverted.
Yep.
And decreasing fertility rates, subfertility, PCOS, high test levels because in the corporate environment, obesity, and all these kind of things are wreaking havoc on fertility within the Muslim community. You mentioned earlier shame. And someone said to me, maybe about 6 months ago, these sisters who are 25, 30, 35 and unmarried because of their own choices, not because they've been looking since they were 18, they couldn't find guys, which, by the way, is very unlikely, by the way, if you look for, a few years. Yeah. So shaming. So I think this is one of the important things we can talk about next time when you're in the UK. Daniel Haqiqatjou, been a pleasure having you on. How can people find you online?
They can go to MuslimSkeptic.com. We also have a YouTube channel. I'm also on Twitter. You can search Muslim Skeptic, or you can search my last name, and it should come up on social media, inshaAllah. But I really appreciate speaking with you. I learned a lot. Jazakallah khair. This looks like a great podcast. All the best to you.
Jazakallah khair. Daniel, thank you so much. Shukran. Thank you.